Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to gap some rings. Good day, everyone. Welcome back. And yes, today is now time to gap some rings. Pistons are done. They turned out great. And I went through here with a little oil. You can see it kind of wicking its way up, but I've lubricated all the wrist pins, moved them back and forth just to get a little lubricant in there. But now, get the engine pulled over, it's time to check the gap on our piston rings. Now, because I had the pistons custom ground and also had the rings from the same company, and I gave them the specs of my engine, these should be almost ready to go. But you never know, mistakes happen. Sometimes they're quick, and they even state that they get them close, but you still need to check the gap. Now, before we get started, just like everything else, of course, we're going to weigh the ring sets just to make sure that they're close enough that it doesn't matter. And we're going back to my 30 millimeter socket, which is what I just use for kind of my constant. And it always reads out between 234.4 and 234.3. So as long as I'm within that tolerance, that 1/10 of a gram is perfectly fine. So we know our scale is good. So I'm just gonna grab a set of rings here, put them on. We're going to weigh them a couple times each just to make sure that we get our spacing. So this is between 163.4, 163.3, depending on how I drop them on there. So that scale is good and repeatable. And we're going to go on and continue working through the rest of the sets. 63.0, this will probably balance out at 63.1 as it goes. There, it just went to 1 before I stopped. So I'll go through, do these a few times, then come back, do them again, and average out my numbers. Okay, so after measuring quite a few times and averaging out the numbers, this is what I come up with. So all these are within 2/10. They're perfectly acceptable to use, fine the way they are. I'm not going to bother mix matching any of these rings. There's not enough here to make a difference, and everything should be good. So, our weights are good. We have them all marked out where they're going to be. These will stay in the retrospective spots. So, this will be stack number 1 with piston number 1, which goes in hole number 1. So, get a little closer look at the rings here first. Now, this is the top ring. This is a square cut ring. There's no bevels or anything on it, and no marking. It's just a clear ring itself. That's the top compression ring. Second ring, though, now we start to get into some milling here. I don't know if you can, it's kind of hard to focus, but this ring is not square on the inside. It's got a nice taper to it, and it also has got a small taper on the outside. And if we get close enough here, you can see that dot? There we go. That indicates the top of the ring. That would be the top of the left-hand side. So we do know that as a top ring. Then we come into our standard oil rings here. There's a top cap and a bottom cap to that. And then these are also very specific of how they're lined up on the piston. Now, you never want piston rings, the gaps lined up. But with the oil ring in particular, you can see this is the spacing between the two halves where they recommend that it goes up. But also, if you're looking at the lower and upper rails, you can see where in retrospect they should be across from each other. Now, as for the actual gap, they're not real specific on that, but I would put it at the bottom, getting it furthest away from the other gaps as possible. Even though this doesn't really matter, this one here will be touching, it'll be tight together, and that corrugated kind of profile will give its expansion in a note as the engine heats up and cools down. But this video is less about how they go on the pistons as it is to getting these rings seated in here, making sure they have the correct gap. So what we're going to do, we're going to start off the first ring here. So this is the front of the engine. left-hand side, cylinder 1, and that's how we're going to work it. So we'll do the odd side first. We're going to do 1, 3, 5, and 7. We'll measure those out, the top ring, the middle ring, and also the oil ring, checking the gap. And if we need to, we'll grind them down. All right, so before I put this ring in here, I've prepped these cylinders that I've gone through with a lint-free rag, and I've wiped them all out. Then I've taken a cloth with a little bit of engine oil, and I kind of rubbed it in there just to give it a little bit of lubrication, because this will be a dry fit even though it's not tight. We're just going to be pushing them in. So first off, just going to take a ring here, get it all the way around, kind of even it out. Now I don't have the actual tool, the fancy tool you would use to press in there to line up that bearing. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the piston, and I'm going to go by each ring step to get my depth. So I'm just going to put that in there. We're going to slide that down to we're even all the way around with the ring gap for the first ring. Now we'll take our measurement. So we got our Mopar book out here, and we're working on the first and secondary rings to start off, and they're both the same. So they give us a gap. Tightest that ring gap can be is 0.013. The biggest should be 0.023. So I have my feeler gauges here all set up. And what we're looking for, sorry about that, is that gap right there. So we're going to take our thinnest gauge first. We're going to check it. It does fit in there. I can feel a little bit of grab on it. We'll turn it around for our biggest one, and it does not go in. You cannot fit it in the hole. So we know that we're within tolerance between the two sizes. So now the next one, I'll do the second ring down, exact same procedure. I'll just put it in and using the piston, lower it down to the second ring hole, work my way across, right down to the oil rings, and we'll complete this side. All right, so it didn't take long for me to find a problem. So we're on to the second ring on cylinder number, what is this? Number 3, sorry. So again, with our gauges, now if you look close, you can see the gap. The big one definitely does not go in. Our little one, same thing. I cannot get it in there. It is too tight. That gap is too close. Now, the danger with that, and the reason why we check the gap of these rings. While this engine is running, and these pistons, rings, everything's starting to heat up, those rings are going to start to expand. So as it expands, that tip, the two tips are going to come together and they're going to touch. And if it gets too hot, as that engine heats up, those rings continue to expand and get bigger. Now there's nowhere for them to go. The ends are touching. It cannot close anymore. So the pressure starts going out to your cylinder wall, creating excessive wear and a lot of heat. And that will crack the ring, break the ring. Either way, it's going to be a bad day. So we're going to show you how to take care of that. So here we have a ring grinding tool. So this is going to grind the insides of the ring here, the two tips, so we can make that gap smaller inside the cylinder. So this is a little diamond wheel. It's just a manual, nothing fancy. Has these two black nubs here. These are tapered. These are tapered on the bottom so that as you pull this ring in, it wants to hold it down. And what we're going to do is with our hand, we're slowly going to close this in to we're just touching this wheel. And then we're going to rotate it, putting pressure on it to slowly grind off the inside of the rings. Now, most rings have a bit of a coating on the outside of them. You want to make sure we don't chip this. So when we turn this wheel, we want to make sure that it's always going into the ring. So it's not flaking the edge of this piston off on the finished side. So it just goes in gentle. Going to make sure that it's a counterclockwise motion. We're going to pull it together. Just till it touches like that. And just gently clean the inside of those rings. Now, we'll look at this. You You can see where it kind of cleaned it up a little bit on each side. Not so much on that one, which was a high spot. So ground-wise, that is good. Now, before we shove this back in the cylinder to test it, we want to make sure that there's absolutely no sharp edges here. So what I have is a jeweler's file. Yes, the tip is broken off. That's okay. But this is a jeweler's file. It's about a 300 grit, but we're not going to actually use it like a file. We're going to turn it around and drag it on the smooth side on quite a steep angle, but just a little tiny rub on each side, just like that. Your fingers are good for 0.010 of an inch and better. You should be able to feel the difference, feel it nice and clean. This is the bottom side down. I can feel there's a little edge there, so the same thing. We're just going to clean that up a little bit on all sides. It doesn't take much. This is a hard steel, so it's not like it's malleable and rolled right over. But we're just clean that up just a little bit. Nice and clean. Now we'll throw it back in the cylinder and check it out. All right, so that ring gap is still a little tight, so we're going to do it just a little bit more. We're going to concentrate on the left-hand side here a little bit. Just giving that little grind. I can see a little more has come off. Oh, and we're almost perfectly shiny on that side. So again, going backwards with the file. Just going to clean the edges. Just a little bit. We're going to go back and check this one more time, and hopefully we're good. So here we are, we're back in. Got the heavy gauge first. I could really force that in if I wanted to. It starts to go and then it's tight. If I flip it around to my thin side, I can now fit that gauge in there and just feel, if I just move it a little bit, I can feel the drag. So now that ring is good. So we continue on with all these, doing the bottom one as well too. Now one thing, when you get down to your oil ring, they are a different gap. They require a much larger gap just to get that oil, the relief out of there. So if you're going by the Mopar book, once you get down to your oil spacing, your caps, it'll be 0.015 to 0.055. So that is the bottom ones, which are quite thin, quite small, and there'll be a much larger gap in those just to help allow that oil to escape. That's that. I have rotated the engine. I'm now on the right-hand side, cylinders 2, 4, 6, and 8, and I've gone through, and all rings are done and ground. I had to grind 4 rings, not a lot, but you know what? It's only going to take one to really ruin your day. So for the price of this tool, this one here I got off Amazon. It's a manual one, so it's fairly cheap. It only comes with 1 grinding wheel, though you shouldn't have to go through multiple grinding wheels on a job. But it came with 1 wheel. I think this was $34.99. Works great. Will I have to use it again? Probably not. You know, I guess down the road I might do another engine. But good insurance for the block I'm building now. And I am now confident that with the expansion and heat of this engine, I'll have no worries with the rings inside. Now it's time to put these rings in their spot on the piston. So I have this, just this in my vise here. I actually got wood in between the jaws on both sides, just to make sure I don't make any marks on it. This holds it good, in a good spot, so we can work on it, because it will be moving around a bit. And we're going to get all the rings on here. Now, we're starting off with the bottom oil ring, of course, down here. But we don't actually put the very bottom cap ring on first. What's going to be going on first is the actual oil ring. If you look real close here, see if I can get it on the video. Get it to focus, come on. There we go. At the back of this ring, you can see there's a little raised edge, a little nub sticking up. Sorry about this. Come on, there we go. Oh, perfect. There's the little nub on the back. That is where the cap rings rest. They don't actually touch the piston. The oil ring here, the clearing ring, it touches the piston, but his other ones actually butt right up against that. So this ring is really stretchy, very easy to get on. First thing, it just pops in there nice. And now we move on to the cap rings. Now these ones here, they are very stretchy as well. This way is okay to bend. You gotta be very careful how much you spread these open. You don't want to go too far. Now when we're putting these on, we're gonna make sure we're going to the bottom of this ring first. So we're just gonna get it over the edge. Start seating it in. And we just work our way around gently, making sure we're not overstretching that ring at all. Get to the bottom there. Oh, the top half kind of stuck in. There we go. So we got our way around there. Now we just got to find our gap. See, I don't know if you can see that. There we have our gap in our center ring. So we're just going to gently put the end of a file in there. Going to open that up and make sure those two ends come together so that this lower ring just sits nicely in there. Now we're going to do the same with the top ring, top cap ring as well. Work its way around. Get it in there. Now we'll get a little closer look at that. All right, so right here, where it doesn't make a loop like these, that is a space in that washer ring. If we rotate this around, there's a gap for the top ring, there's a gap for the lower ring. Now, you can stick anything in here. I have this little tool with a V on it, which really fits nice in there. And that holds that good, so I can easily slide the gaps around on these lower rings here to where they need to be. Now, going back to instructions, they're very specific of where they show the gaps of these rings. I'm not going to worry about it right now because they will move around when I'm putting it all together. But once this goes back into the engine, we'll be really paying attention to where those gaps line up. Now we're going to move on to the second ring. And this one doesn't matter where it goes. If you remember back, it is indexed. There's a dot on there. That dot is the top part of the ring. So we're going to make sure that that is up. It's the same process, except for these rings are much stiffer. So once we get it started, just going to be really careful that we don't overstretch this ring. Now another thing is, the secondary ring is thicker than the top ring. So we want to make sure that it doesn't get stuck in the first ring hole, because there is that little lip on this one that does make it so it'll fit in there. So we're going to make sure we go right past it, nice and gentle, not spread out too much. And there we go. Our second ring is on. Then we got our first ring, of course, which there is no up and down to this ring. It does fit a little tighter, but again, starting off at the bottom, working our way around not to stretch it too far. And there we go, we're in. Now, you can see there's quite a large gap here. I can push them down, and you can see that they're hanging right out. But that is our spacing, so that when we put this in to the engine, into that cylinder, that's going to pull these all together. And that's when it's going to get our gap in the rings that we work so hard to make sure that it's perfect. So, not much to it. Fairly easy. Just got to take your time. Be careful you don't overstretch that ring. We're going to move on. Do 7 more. We'll check in and see how it goes. Just like that. All the rings are in. So, the next step. Oh yeah, she's happening. Real close. Got our rod bearings. Gonna start setting them out. Getting the dust-free towel, cleaning them up. And getting ready to drop in our first piston. So I got all my bearings out and gave them a little wipe down. And I've actually gone through here and I've popped the lower cap bearing in on all of them. So I use my dust-free towel, clean down the inside of this cap, rub down the back of the bearing as well too, just to make sure that there is no chance to get something between there. Everything fit good. Keep it in mind when you put these bearings in, there is no top and bottom, but they are indexed. See the little bump sticking off the side there? And they do correspond with the notch that's in the cap. Then also the notch that's in the rod itself. Now also, I've been over at the block here cleaning. I've gone through the crank here multiple times with a little bit of solvent the first time, then a rag to clean it off, and the third time with a lint-free rag, just to make sure all our journals are perfectly clean, and they are shining like diamonds. And then I've gone through and I've cleaned all the cylinders on each side and also the tappet holes, making sure that everything on there is clean. All my bolt holes, nothing has anything in it, just so something doesn't fall down inside while I'm doing the work on this thing. But this is clean, ready to go. I'll just lay a rag over top of all the cylinders. We'll rotate this back around just to get it into the right orientation. We're going to be starting right there on the right hand side. Cylinders 2, 4, 6, and 8. But before we do that, we got to work on ring positioning. Now it's time to get into the good stuff. It's time to put one of these pistons in that block. So I've gone through and I've cleaned my caps one more time, and I've cleaned the back side of the bearings. Now there is no upper and lower cap bearing for this on this set. They are indexed though. You can see the little groove there, a little hole in the cap, and then there's a little notch in the bearing. So just make sure they're going the right way. And the same thing on the connecting rods as well too. They have a notch as well. So you just want to make sure they're lined up, get them in nice and flat, and cleanliness is the key. So now over here on the block, we've got to go through, we got to wash out every cylinder. I just take a lint-free rag with a little bit of solvent. We're going to clean every cylinder. We'll go back through, dry them up. Then we're going to go through with motor oil on a rag and rub all the cylinders down just to give them a little lubrication. We'll rotate the crank over, or the engine block over. We'll go underneath there, and we're going to re-clean that crank, get it polished off good again. Then we're going to go through all the tappet holes and make sure that we get all them cleaned up as well. All right, before we jump into throwing this piston in, we're going to talk a little bit about ring gap here, because this is very important. And not the gapping on the end that we already did, but where the ring gaps are spaced. Now, I always recommend go to the manufacturer first. Check to see what's in your box or what they recommend. On this particular set, which is pretty common and also pretty simple, there's only 2 compression rings and 1 oil ring. The oil ring is the only thing they're real concerned about. And they're very specific of where they want those ring rails to be spaced. So I've gone through and I've spaced them separately apart, just like it shows in the diagram here. And then when we put them together, we'll just double check again to make sure that where they come together, they're pointing up in the air, which I have right here somewheres. They are good to go. And there's my, sorry about that. There's my gap there, and they are going up. So my main oil ring is fine. It's not real picky. Line them up with these top rings because this is a perforated ring, so oil's passing through here anyway, and this oil is made to go through this ring into the inside of the piston. It'll actually drop down on the top where this rod wrist pin goes through, and there's a little hole in there that help lubricate that up. But these 2 top rings, these are the important ones. Now, I only have 2 rings on mine, so it makes it easy. And what we're doing here is this is more about timing than anything. And not timing on your engine per se, but we're talking about the time that it takes for exhaust gases or combustion gases to travel past your rings and into your crankcase, creating crank pressure. Now, of course, these are exaggerated because once this is in the block, these will be squished in tight, and it'll be that small little gap that you saw there earlier when we were gapping these rings. But regardless of what you do, you will never stop compression from passing through this ring. What we're looking to do here is when this is on your combustion stroke and your combustion gas in there is the big bang, pistons going down, all that pressure is going to go somewhere. So one, it's pushing the piston down. The other one is it's traveling in the ring groove behind the ring, forcing that ring out. What it's also doing is passing through that end gap and coming down into your crankcase. Now we're talking milliseconds here, maybe even quicker than that, that it's the boom and that pressure is through. And if these rings are lined up, that pressure has a straight line right past and into your crankcase. Now, as we move these, this is what we're talking about time. We move it to here. When combustion happens, that pressure comes through, passes the first ring. Well, it has nowhere to go. It hits your ring here. So the pressure split. One starts to go this way, and some of it starts to go this way until it finds a space to continue on and go out. So there is a delay here. We're not in the 2 milliseconds anymore. Maybe we're only 3.5. Maybe we're now 5. But if we take these rings and we space these 180 degrees apart of each other, that combustion pressure now has to go down through the gap, all the way around the ring, and out the other side. Now, this is even. This path that the pressure takes is even. It is also the furthest distance that I can get between the two rings, giving me enough time that just maybe, with the stroke of that engine, before that pressure fully leaks out into the crankcase on the secondary ring, the exhaust valve has opened and my stroke is complete. Now this is the ring compressor we're going to use. This is probably the most basic, cheapest kind you can get, and they are cheap. They're extremely sharp as well too, so be careful. But they're effective and they work well. So if it's something you're not doing a lot of, you don't need to be going out and spending $50, $60 on the sets of blocks that are perfectly made for your bore to pop these in. This kind of, it'll work on just about any size, down to a small piston up to quite large. And I think it was less than 20 bucks with Amazon Prime to get it shipped to me. So it's pretty simple. Comes a little key. You open it up just so it's big enough to fit over your piston. And then making sure you don't turn this too much because you don't want to change the rotation of your rings. Going to wind this in until it comes tight against the piston. And now just compress those rings into the grooves as far as they can go so we get them to pass by the block. All right, so we have the cylinders all cleaned out. Everything's washed down. And we got them lubed up with assembly lube really good down in the crank journal. And now I also have the crank turned so it is the furthest away from the connecting rod while I'll tap this in. So with everything prepped and ready to go here, I installed the other half of my rod bearing. I've also put in these two small rubber pieces of hose on here so that when I put this down inside, it doesn't hit the crank and ding it on those threads. So this is going to be fairly tight fit. So I'm going to set this down here gently, nice and square so that piston slides right in. We're going to give a slight little tap just to make sure that the spring compression tool is straight. We've checked to make sure that our index is facing the front of the engine. One more little tighten. Now with a rubber mallet, just going to gently tap these pistons down inside, listening and watching to make sure that the rings are compressed enough, which they are. And there we go. The piston is in. You can see where the rubbers have come up through here, and they're keeping those threads away from the crank. So we just take our rubber mallet, the handle again underneath. So we're going to tap that piston up further. Being very careful, so we can see when the bearing is getting close to the journal. We're nice and close there, so now we can take our little rubber guards off. Now when this piston goes in, because of the offset, you can see that this is going to be the one that goes to this side. So we'll just gently hold it in the middle, tap it softly. We get it all snugged up. Of course, we grab our cap, checking the number on here. We are matched. It is going the correct way. We can tell by our notches as well too where they're at. So that cap will just go on there nice. We got the bearing in there. Lots of assembly lube. Again, holding up on the piston. Just a gentle little tap till they touch. Grabbing our connecting rod nuts. And that is it. Piston is in. So now, just got to do that 7 more times. Hopefully everything goes smooth. You're running no issues. Well, there's no parts left on the workbench. And all pistons are in the block. Everything went fairly smooth. Only had to push one out once because I started putting it into the wrong hole. There's always a chance of mistake. Double check everything you do. I did have one piston I grabbed off the right side and I started putting it on to the left side. But we definitely caught her and got them all in their retrospective spots. And they are in. And this part of the job is done. This thing is getting so close to getting the heads put on, buttoned up. So good. Feels so good. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Thumbs up, always greatly appreciated. Subscribe if it's your first time through. And hope you guys have a great day.